talking to you about Inchberry, a place that I hardly knew existed a year ago. A year ago, Inchberry was a name on a sign as I drove from Beaulieu, my home, to Inverness on the south side of the Beaulieu Firth. And now, through a whole series of chance, serendipity, and colleagues' input, I know so much more about Inchberry that I just want to share that with you. I want to share the jigsaw of piecing together lots of different bits of information to make a composite whole. It started with graffiti, which led to consideration of the military use of the Beaulieu Firth in the Second World War. I was grateful to a whole lot of information from maps that pieced together information over a period of time. Someone sent me a newspaper report that was provided really detailed background information. And because we're an archaeological organization, we did a survey of the Steading of this farm. And through, again, serendipity, I was introduced to the family of the man who really made Inchberry Steading happen. It all started in March this year, when quite out of the blue, I got an email from Ian Shepherd, who is the estate manager of the Lovett estate, who works out of this wonderful Victorian building in the middle of Beaulieu. This is what Ian said. I'm not sure if this is of the slightest bit of interest to anyone in Nosas, but there are a number of drawings amidst the graffiti on the walls at Inchberry Steading at Lentron, which appear to have World War I and World War II references. We are now letting the Steadings to Glenwivis Distillery for storage. They will be securing the premises in the next 5 to 6 weeks, and access may be difficult thereafter. And together with his email, he attached 5 photographs. Which demonstrate the graffiti that he was referring to. Well, they looked good to me. So I contacted Ian back and said, oh yes, please, I'd love to look at these. Where do we go? So for those of you who don't know the area, you're looking at the Beaulieu Firth, the South Shore, and then Inchberry Farm is sited on the land above the Firth, just as it rises to the south, to the high ground, up to Inchberry Hill. I drove along to the farm, to the Steadings, and this is what I saw. To me, as a non-architect and someone who doesn't know that much about Steadings, I thought this was amazing. Just wonderfully symmetrical buildings, very fine quality. And then Ian took me through this door here. We walked to the back of the building, up the steps, up a stairway, into a gallery above the first floor, on the first floor above the building. And you can see that the walls of the gallery are plastered, plasters disintegrating and deteriorating. But it was on that plaster that these images were drawn. And just quickly taking you around, bottom left is an aeroplane, a tractor, maybe a car. Top left looks like a Wellington bomber to me. Top right, a Spitfire. Bottom right, HMS Hood, that was sunk in the Battle of Denmark, May 1941. And right in the middle, someone's tried to draw the Kaiser, someone who can't actually spell the name properly. So that suggests mainly World War II, but maybe even World War I images drawn by, well, I didn't know who really. And there were just hints as to where these came from. I shared these images with some colleagues in NOSAS because that's what we do. Two colleagues, Susan Cruiser and Alistair Cameron, directed me towards that fount of architectural knowledge, archaeological knowledge, Wikipedia. Now this is Lentron, which is a big house and a community about a mile to the west of Inchberry. But there is a phrase in here that I just want you to notice that helped me, work out a little bit more where the graffiti might have come from. You'll see that there's a hyperlink number at the base of that quote. And if you click on that, you get to the National Archives of England, who have a whole AIR and RAF section. And eventually I found my way to this web page. And it appears that number 79 maintenance unit of the RAF formed at Lentron House between 1941 and 1945. They took over the house. There was a big RAF camp that was in the area that's now Bunkrew campsite and caravan site. So it's not too much of a stretch of the imagination to think that maybe it was people from the RAF unit who were stationed or billeted or even just used the Steading. But if you took your eyes off the military images, the whole wall was covered by graffiti. Names, addresses, comments, pictures, sums, tallies. It was like, oops, just one too many. It was like someone's notebook. They just used the wall to write on. Even, you'll notice bottom left, Barbara Wesley Milne from the Women's Land Army left her mark there as well. So just a priceless record of a whole lot of people working their way through this gallery at the back of the Steading and leaving their mark there. Every surface was used. Here's a wooden partition that divides the gallery, and that was used as a notebook and to help you read the writing. I've transcribed it there. 88, I assume that's 1988 from the quality of the writing and its freshness, rather than 1888. It's possible it could have been 1888. Well, what was this building that housed, this magnificent building that housed all these, all this graffiti? I went to look at the maps, as I do, because maps tell me a lot of stories. And we, in a way, go back to the maps that started the story in the first place, my involvement with the Lovett Estate, which was the estate maps from 1757 onwards, a wonderful collection of continuous maps of the estate. And we start with 1757, a random, to me, collection of buildings. 40 years later, George Brown's map shows that these buildings have become consolidated, perhaps a bit better organized. I don't know, but I wonder if what we're seeing in the transition there is this transition to an improved agricultural landscape with the consolidation of farms replacing more scattered buildings and a more collective run rig form of agriculture. If you skip another 60 years to David Gordon, who produced many really quality maps for the estate, you'll see that the buildings have become consolidated even more. There is, if you can see my arrow there, that's probably the farmhouse, because that's where the farmhouse is now. But you've got the Steadings at the back. Notice that circular feature, which in the absence of any obvious water, I interpret as a horse gang driving agricultural machinery within the building. And then just 10 years later, that horse gang is gone. But you've got another circular feature at the back, which I think is a water wheel and a lathe that comes from this new dammed pond here, which has a sluice attached to it. But the buildings themselves are very much as they were 10 years previously. 30 years later, the Ordnance Survey were back and have transformed the area. Well, not they, but they're recording a transformation. My goodness, what happened? How did that happen? Who did that? You'll notice that the farmhouse has had an extension built on the front. But this collection of buildings, separate steadings in about 1870, is now replaced by a huge block of buildings. The water wheel at the back seems to have gone, but the sluice and the lathe are still there. So I think it's just that it wasn't drawn. And if you fast forward now 120 years to what it looks like today, you'll see that it hasn't really changed very much. The farmhouse is still much the same, and the square block of the Steadings is much the same. The aerial photograph allows us to see a bit more of the structure, the components of this steading. You'll see these two roofs represent a huge central cattle area. On the bottom side here, there's perhaps the stable block. The top side is the byre, and then this long corridor at the back connects all of these components, and it's the top floor of that has the gallery that has the graffiti. If anyone wants to know about how an agricultural business works or agricultural machinery, they ask Alistair Cameron, who's a wonderful colleague to have. And Alistair invited himself and volunteered to come and help me sort out how this steading worked, because I was curious. It was so impressive, so awesome. So he and I walked around it. He described the various components of it. You'll see bottom left and bottom right, you've got these large central courts, these large areas. There's modern partitioning here in preparation for the distillery bringing their whiskey in. But you can imagine that this was a huge open area which is tiered, which is designed to house and to feed cattle. At top left, this is the byre, which is in a way the top of that we saw on the previous image. You can see that you can still see the marks where the divisions for the cattle were, but it's been plastered over, and it's been plastered over because this area and the stable block were used in recent decades as a grain store. And you can see here in the middle that this was a dryer for the grain as it came into the building. It then went up to the top floor to the gallery and was distributed along the length of the stable and the byre on a grain belt driven by this motor. And then on the ground floor at the back, there's a threshing machine, and we've got evidence for uses of other parts of the building. Another colleague, Anne McInnes, was also involved at this stage, and she and I walked around the building and thought that if this is going to disappear into a distillery, so to speak, if it's going to be used by a distillery from here on, maybe we should record it and make a proper survey. So Anne did a magnificent measured survey of this building, both inside and outside, which she drew up. I'm just going to go back to that previous photo. There is that wooden railing protects people from falling into the well, the pit in which the water wheel would have been. The water wheel's gone now, but the structure that supported it is still there. So Anne did a magnificent survey of this building, and I digitized it. And this is the gallery, which is the top floor of the first floor of the back of the building. You'll see some of the components that I've just been describing. So there's a grain hopper, the grain conveyor and belt would have come vertically downwards into the rest of the building. And the graffiti was all along the insides of all these walls. There's a wooden partition all around here. And that's the floor plan of the building, showing the various components. I think what was innovative at the time was that you had a central passageway here, like a platform, almost like a road in which you could bring the food and drop it down into the feeding troughs below it. There's a threshing mill, and notice the water wheel. Notice the alignment of that, which is out of kilter with the alignment of the new fire, the new Steading, but it is in alignment with the Steading that was there before it. I think when they rebuilt the Steading, they kept the previous water wheel and its pit and just accepted the drive from that at an angle. How did this magnificent building come about? We know that it happened within a 30-year period from the first edition to the second edition Ordnance Survey. But there are some clues on the building itself. Right in the front of the building, there is this plaque, a commemorative plaque to the foundation stone being laid. I've transcribed that for you so you can read it more clearly. This happened in April 1878, and the foundation stone was laid by the Master of Lovat. The Master is this eldest son of the Lord Lovat throughout the generations. Interestingly, the Master of Lovat at this time was 7 years old, so he must have had some help laying the foundation stone. And that's what he looked like 30 years later when he was 37. Let me bring you back, though, to the bottom name, bottom right, to James Reed, tenant. So we had a family name. We knew in a way the tenant who was perhaps the initiator of this magnificent building. And by chance, having shared the information around NOSAS, another colleague, Malcolm Bangor-Jones, who's a great historian and archivist who collects lots of information, forwarded me a couple of images of a newspaper article from the North British Agriculturalist, which I guess we all know very well, from 1878. This is 7 months after the foundation stone was laid, and it describes the new building, the completed new building. And I would just want to read you the first couple of sentences because it gives you a sense of the article and the changes that this man, James Reed, made. The extensive farm of Inchberry on the estate of Lord Lovat in the parish of Kirkhill in Venetia has been occupied by Mr. James Reed, a native of Aberdeenshire since 1860. At the date of entry, the farm was one open plain, not a single fence being erected from one end to the other. Since then, it has been subdivided by stone dikes and wire fences into regular fields of from 20 to 25 acres each. And the article then goes on to describe the management of the farm, the changes that occurred that were introduced by Mr. James Reed, this agricultural innovator, and the building itself. Okay, so we now know that the Steading derived from Mr. James Reed, who took over the farm in 1860 and 18 years later initiated this development. Another bit of serendipity was that the farmhouse circled there was sold by the estate in probably the 1970s and is now occupied by a man I sort of knew, Mr. Andrew Kent, who's a surgeon at Regmore Hospital. So I metaphorically knocked on his door and he very kindly showed me round the house, his house, the old farmhouse, and we talked about the history of it and the Steading as much as he knew. But he also told me that someone had actually knocked on his door some years previously. A man called Bill Wright, who said that his family used to live in the farm and run the farm. He had some details for Bill Wright, and I then contacted Bill myself, who introduced me to his sister, Hilary Clare. And Bill and Hilary are the great grandchildren of James Reed, this agricultural innovator. So I talked to, I emailed Bill and I had quite a long correspondence with Hilary, and I was really grateful for the photos and the information that you're now about to see. So here's James Reed. This photo seems to be taken from the time of his marriage, maybe his honeymoon, 1863. Remember then that he was, at that stage, he was 47. No, he wasn't. He was, he took over the farm when he was 29 years old. So he's now about 32 or 33. And I just love the image on the right-hand side of your screen of his wife, Isabella, who came from Firish near Alness. James, let's go through the timescale again. James, born in 1831, took over the farm in 1860, coming from Aberdeenshire. Married in 1863, developed the Steading in the 1878, and presumably at the age of 47 then he was in the full flood of wanting to develop the farm and to use the Steading, but sadly fate had something else in mind for him. The story goes that he was swimming in the Firth just north of the farm, contracted scarlet fever and died within a few days. He left his widow, Isabella, and her 6 children, 5 of whom are behind her and to her right. And she continued the farm for the next 36 or 7 years with the help of her children, and moved into Inverness just a few years before her death in 1916. Just want to highlight that cheeky little fella there, who's called William, who apparently had a brilliant mind, was an academic, became a minister. He did work on the farm for almost a decade in the early 20th century. But he left some memoirs that he wrote when he was about 60. And he described conversations and some information that he had from his mother, which I think are truly poignant. They're poignant in terms of this magnificent agricultural development by someone who died prematurely, who left his widow to continue. And this is what he said about his mother. My mother often told me afterwards, when she was left alone to shoulder the responsibility of running the farm, that she had always protested against the outlay of money on such a white elephant of a building, as she called it. Indeed, she had a presentiment that something would happen. She was brought up on a farm, had great knowledge of the practical business of farming life, and yet she never liked the job, and her heart was never much in Inchberry, and she would have left it at any time without a tear. So she had to carry on all that time, those 36 years, with the building, which she regarded as so unsuitable, and in a farm whose bad points and poverty were ever present to her mind, while the man who had built it and knew exactly the uses he was to put it to, died after a few days of illness within 5 years of his conceiving and planning its execution. So I want to finish by just paying tribute to fate that brought Inchberry my way, and the various people and colleagues who contributed to this jigsaw of the story that I've put together. Thanking again, particularly Hilary and Bill and the descendants of the Reed family who've helped me along the way. I hope to write this up as a report, a NOSAS report, include some blog articles on our website. And even as I was preparing this talk, I'm aware that there are several avenues of research that I should go down, particularly about the RAF and the graffiti and so on. But I'll finish there and try and stop sharing my screen.